Welcome to episode 4 of the Robot Report podcast, which brings conversations with robotics innovators straight to you. My name is Steve Crow, editor of the Robot Report. Please subscribe to the Robot Report podcast. New episodes drop each and every Wednesday. We're now available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Smash that subscribe button and please leave us a rating. I'm joined now by senior editor Eugene Demetri. Gino, I hope you're doing well, my friend. Another special edition of the podcast today.
Episode 4, A New Hope. It's great to be here. And we are looking this week at 2 more RBR 50 Innovation Award winners, Six River Systems and Gatik. Last week, as you might recall, we talked to Universal Robots, talked to Boston Dynamics. We'll be talking to more RBR 50 companies throughout the year. But we'll start off today with our conversation with Six River Systems founder Chris Cacioppo. As you might all know, Six River was last year acquired by Shopify for $500 million. We'll get into how the acquisition's been going. We'll also get a peek inside the first Shopify fulfillment center using Six River's technology.
We kicked off the interview by asking Chris how Six River Systems differentiates itself from the competition.
So I think the way we got to it is, if you look at me and Jerome and Rylan, who are the 3 co-founders, we have very, very different skill sets and come from a different space. So if you look at Jerome, he's very much solutions. Like, he lives and breathes fulfillment. He's done a lot of GTM, go-to-market type work. Rylan is very much an operations guy, how to get things running all the time, keep it running, keep a machine going. And I came very much from a technological standpoint of, like, I can build anything. I have a team of people that can actually jump in and cover all the hardware, software, electronics, algorithms, and whatnot. So I think the way we approach it is coming from a problem statement. So we're very deliberately Six River Systems and not Six River Robotics. We came from it as, how do we solve the problem? And our goal was, we looked at the industry, and automation is pretty much concentrated. It's too expensive for most players. And so big players were essentially dominating any sort of cost advantages. And so we were looking at, how do we democratize automation? And so there's sort of a perfect storm right now where e-commerce is shooting up. So these each picks are really hard to do, expensive, relatively speaking, what happened in the past. The robotics industry has been shot up between very, very inexpensive, high-power processors, between inexpensive sensors that used to cost tens of thousands of dollars, and now you can get for less than $1,000 or less. And then the amount of software, open source software, and talent around the area, sort of a perfect storm to sort of create this industry. And again, we're solution providers. At this point, 75% of our engineers are not doing anything robotics related directly. They're doing all the solutions part. I mean, they use robotics, but it's a solutions game.
Chris, we know that your approach, if anything, got a big vote of confidence this past year with Shopify Acquisition. How's the integration going with them? How have they helped you in terms of scaling, or how's that being part of a larger organization? How's that working out?
So I was cautiously optimistic. Any acquisition always has, risks involved, but it's been off to an amazing start. We've worked very closely with a lot of the upper leadership at Shopify. We're being run as an independent business, but obviously very heavily influenced on building this model, the Shopify Fulfillment Network, and we got our first warehouse up and running in the Shopify Fulfillment Network using our technology. So I think that's really good. One thing, I think if you look at Shopify, what they have done is, if you look back, Toby says, what I really want to do is empower small business. I want to grow small businesses. So we started with making websites. It was a pain point for customers to make your own website. After that, he said, what's the next pain point? It was collecting revenue. Good. So he made a payment system, so it was very, very easy to collect revenue. Then fraud protection was a giant problem and causing tons of issues. So he put a fraud protection case in place. I believe now there's a micro loan thing to help get small businesses started. And what he wanted to do for a long time is do the fulfillment part, because that's very, very hard for companies. And it's a really hard problem, anyone that's been in this space. And I think he's asked year after year, again, I'm told his executive staff is like, can we do this now? And they're like, not ready. And then in 2019, they're like, we can do this. And they announced it at their one of their internal or external events that they were going to launch this network. And they looked for a while. And then I think when they talked to us, we ended up being the partner they chose. And I think it's because our visions were very similar. Like we really, really wanted to democratize automation, and they really, really want to empower small businesses. And it was a great combination.
What's the goal for Shopify? Is it to help? From everything that I've read and that I understand about the acquisition, is that fulfillment network is hoping to allow these small businesses to better compete with Amazon. Is that your understanding?
I think it's better to compete with anybody. The goal here is to make small businesses flourish. So I keep bringing up his name. Toby is like small businesses sort of generate all of the amazing growth in economies for the most part, like all the innovation, everything else. And how do we make them succeed more? So we are, just to be clear, we are running as an independent company. So all our existing customers and all new customers that have nothing to do with Shopify is definitely on the table, and very, very important to say that. But they want to have the ability to, if you sign up for a Shopify account and you're selling your exciting new COVID masks, once you're actually successful at that, just fulfilling it is very hard. So if you can just sort of send them someplace and they magically get fulfilled, that just makes that company be able to expand much, much faster.
Chris, we know that some mobile robots are based on ROS, the robot operating system. In the past year, one of the big announcements was Microsoft supporting it on Windows 10. Is that something that you would be looking at in terms of supporting your customers?
It depends what that means. So we currently use ROS, and we're a Linux-based system. So we've done that for a long time. As far as supporting it, we have a system that's essentially internally using it. So the customers don't have direct exposure to ROS. So if you look at our system, it's a system that we're essentially a full solutions provider, right? So unlike a lot of robotics companies where people running code on them, the only people running code on our own robots are ourselves. So the exposure to the operating system is not something that we actually do either way. I mean, we do run on ROS, we do happen to run on Linux on ROS, but it is not something we're exposing to customers.
I know of Jerome and Ryland; they were both involved with a Kiva system sale, I believe. How did you hook up with them?
So Jerome and Rylan knew each other from Kiva, and talked to each other and started getting started and had this great idea. And then there was the realization that they didn't know how to build robots because they're both different people in different aspects. And so what happened was they reached out to their contact network, and two of the people they knew they highly respected pointed at me as someone they should talk to, and we spent a bunch of time startup dating, and then I eventually came on board, and then the two people rapidly joined. So it was more of a list of networks of people, and I sort of recommend to anybody doing startups, like, your network is the most important thing.
Since Chuck works with warehouse associates, it is different than some of the other robots that are out there in warehouses. How challenging has it been to develop software that involves both robots and humans? Because you're managing both.
It's correct, and I think there's some UX particular issues. But I think the biggest piece that actually of working with robots is the safety and the comfort of working with collaborative robots. So safety in and of itself is table stakes. Like, I am constantly making sure that people have layers upon layers of safety. When we're early on in our working in our warehouse, and my desk was right next to the floor, I would constantly walk in front of the robot just to make sure they would stop. I figure if they hit me, I'll be annoyed and go complain at somebody. And if they hit a customer, that's going to be a gigantic problem. So I was always personally testing robots constantly. And, our robots have been amazing. Even from day one, we've been extremely good and careful and safe. I've joked with people for years that I would just let my children play with the robots. So actually 9 months ago, I had my 18-month-old son playing with the robots in the warehouse, and he was just fine, excited.
Wow.
And so, like, it's because I trust what I'm doing, and if I said that to people, I had to do it. That being said, safety is a layered thing. Part of the way of fighting safety is not to let your kids play with robots. It's not to walk in front of robots. Like, use your common sense or whatnot. But I'm carefully monitoring when I'm doing this stuff. But safety is a whole bunch of layers. We're trying to protect people from making mistakes, not like avoid them from doing something silly like letting your kids play with a robot.
Does anybody at Six River have a Chuck robot running around their house?
Actually, the answer was no until a few months ago, and there's some trucks running around in basements. But actually, I want to touch a little more, Gene, on your question, because safety is table stakes. It's got to be safe. There's no question about that. The other one is getting people to feel comfortable with the robots, and that's really big because if you have a collaborative robot, there's no way it's going to be effective and be useful if people aren't very comfortable with them. So from day one, I wanted something that people would understand. So I didn't want a circular or rectangular robot. I wanted something with feeling and character. And so when I worked with our industrial designer, my mental model was a car. So if you look at our robots, it has headlights and taillights, which are only necessary just for my vision of which way the robot's going. And the robot goes forward towards the headlights and that it goes backwards to the taillights. It doesn't go backwards, right? It has blinkers, makes turns. If it actually backs up just very slowly, it makes it sound like a truck. The idea is to give people an understanding so they weren't afraid of robots. I'm sure everyone listening to your podcast thinks robots are awesome and cool, but I think a lot of people that are less used to technology think they could be scary. And so I worked very, very, very hard of making them feel and understand something. Instead of teaching them what a robot should act like, I made it look like something they understood.
You said some folks have a Chuck robot in their house, as a result of COVID-19. I'm sure to help continue testing of the robots and ensuring software development and all that kind of stuff. But just talk to me how has COVID-19 affected how Six River Systems is operating?
So I think we're super lucky. I think there's some decisions we made early on having nothing to do with COVID that made our life much better. So I've worked at a lot of startups and I've talked to a lot of people. And one of the problems when you're doing a lot of startups is that they send engineers to customer sites a lot. And our engineers go to customer sites to learn, but having them there is a less effective way. When the customer's a problem, we didn't want the engineers to have to jump on a plane and then be there where they're less efficient and then jump on a plane back. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. It's not really good for anyone. So I spent a lot of time making sure we had tools that allowed us to do a lot of remote debugging, a lot of remote analytics, a lot of remote upgraded firmware and hardware and software. So we have so much control remotely of both understanding what's going on and also be able to debug and make changes remotely. So that was a huge benefit. As a culture ourselves, we had about 15% of our company being full-time remote or primarily remote before COVID. So we had a lot of the tools in place to actually have people communicate and work remotely. At this point, we're about 100. Well, I think we're 100% remote, not about. And so the tools and infrastructure we did to set up the team's working dynamics has been hugely beneficial. We've made tweaks, but we had a lot of the infrastructure there because we were set up as a remote company. We've also done a bunch of things along the way to help things along. We had a hot swap program. We didn't want to send engineers to sites in general. We want customers to be very, very quickly responded. So we can just send robots out to people if there's ever a problem that can't be fixed remotely. They take it out, put theirs one back in, and then mail it back to us. So that's no hands-on, no touch. And then we're constantly proactively monitoring reliability and insight data to sort of give people information. So we should know when they have problems before they know they have a problem and hopefully fix it before they even know there's an issue. So we're constantly monitoring our setups.
What do you I actually have an article in the pipeline about how AMR companies have successfully remotely deployed their systems. And I talked with you guys, I talked with a lot of the other leading providers, and sort of the theme that I got was technically it's been something that was possible for a little while now, but the big reason for it is that these AMR solutions are a proven technology that has a proven business case, and that the customers now understand that. So, if this pandemic happened, a few years ago, do you think all these remote deployments, would you guys still be in the same position to do that if this happened a few years ago? Or, not that the timing is ever great for something like this that we're all dealing with right now, but from that standpoint, are you fortunate, I guess?
We're clearly fortunate. Like a few years ago, and we're company's 5 years old, so like a few years ago, it was a giant leap backwards as far as time goes, and we've sort of learned a lot over times. We would not have been capable. I mean, my mental goal, and I don't will ever get here, is the idea that we just send boxes and they unwrap the shrink wrap and it works. I mean, that I don't think that we're gonna ever get exactly to that point, but we are continuing, COVID aside, to make that as a business model of how do we make it very, very easy to deploy these robots. And again, we're trying to aim to a lot of small businesses are like, how do we make this as effective as possible for them? And big, complicated deployment teams are not a way that's going to eventually reach all the market we want to reach.
What do you think has to be done to get to that point then?
So a lot of it is remote. So we've experimented with all sorts of methodologies of shipping things out, and doing various pieces. So there's unboxing of robots, which can often be done by people on site or possibly third party providers that are local. There's mapping, which we've done remotely, which is allowing the associates or some of the operations team at the building to work with engineers remotely, to get mapping together. And then there's just getting everything to go live. And so one of the huge advantages we have is that from day one, we've been a cloud software-based solution. So everything's in the cloud. So there isn't anything to really set up besides a network connection, and we can do a lot of work. So we are moving towards that direction, and I don't see any giant barriers that are getting in the way of approaching that shrink-wrapped box sort of approach.
So, Chris, looking ahead, what sort of trends or developments do you expect for mobile robots and warehousing in the second half of this year? Because obviously the first half threw everybody off, or we all had to react. But looking ahead, what are you expecting?
So it's interesting looking at our customer base. Some of the customers are off a little bit, but a lot of them are having peaks. So the demand here, I think with COVID, there's a tremendous amount. I think it's accelerated the online movement like in warp speed. So there's a tremendous amount of pent up demand. I think we're going to see more and more people looking for technology. I think we're in the enviable situation that there's almost no automation that can get you the sort of advantage of rapidly teaching people and deployment. I mean, we can theoretically deploy in about 2 weeks. Traditional automation takes months, if not the better part of a year, to deploy. So as people sort of ramp up to try to deal with this changes in the business market, I think there's not a lot of options that are great. And I feel obviously we're lucky to be in the situation where we are. I think it's just the acceleration of the e-commerce market.
Chris, now we're going to get into our quick questions, and feel free to answer them in any way that you please. Uh, so, uh, when the Shopify acquisition came through, what was the first thing you did, or what did you run out and buy?
This will be amusing. I bought two things. I bought YouTube Prime and I bought Hulu Plus, so I didn't have to watch any more commercials. I think those were my first two things, which I should have done probably as soon as they came out. But that was the first two things I bought.
So what are you binging? What shows are you binging?
I'm kind of behind the times. I just finished watching Mad Men and Castle. At this point, I know I'm behind the scenes. I have two kids, and that doesn't even justify it. I'm watching The Orville. I think is my current
Has
show.
season 3 dropped for that yet?
I don't know. I'm in season 2.
Okay. So speaking of science fiction, what's your favorite robot of all time? It can be real or it can be fictional.
Nobody's ever asked me this question. I would think the one that I think had most impact on the way I think about things is the Wall-E robot. That was the first time there's like a really good personification of like, I think real feeling that was deep inside. So I would think that the Wall-E robot from Pixar.
What's the best thing about working at Six River Systems?
I love the team we have. I'm so happy of the people I get to work with, the quality. We've hired so many talented people, and we've hired people that just like what they're doing. And so it's been extremely important to me to find a team that works well together. From my point of view, my mom told me that I'm very close to my mom. She taught me about operating system networking, which is someone who's in their late 40s. No one ever says that their mom taught them stuff. So I think she always said, what you want to do is like hire the awesome, talented people and start a company. I'm like, yes. And it took a while for me to find one that a group of people to work with that were going to cover the strengths where my weaknesses were. Because I'm responsible to the people in my company. I feel like I'm responsible for their families and whatnot. I need to make sure that they have paychecks coming in, that they have challenging work, and that they have a supportive family both at work and at home.
So speaking of home life and work-life balance, what's your favorite thing about working from home right now? We're all confined, but what do you like about it?
So let me paint a picture for you. I have a a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old. So working at home's challenging. um, I think I actually miss being in the office a lot. I think that it's been interesting to get a lot of experience doing remote working, but I love being in the office with
Well, and
people.
I will say, I live in Waltham, not too far from your office, and I miss being able to drop by. So I look forward to the day when we'll all be able to do that again. But what's your least favorite thing about working from home?
I think there's a blurring of where the day starts and the day ends. It's very challenging. Um,
Hmm.
I think that everything sort of blurs together, and that's from working at a startup where it already blurs together to begin with. It's a very blurry line, and I try to make sure that I hold some semblance of it so that my wife stays sane.
I feel your pain, man. I have three girls under 7, so maybe we can share some tips about how we get. Yeah, we can have another podcast about how we get through the days.
Sounds
But
great.
this is a question that I've actually seen a lot. But what's one habit you've picked up during quarantine that you're going to hang on to?
Oh boy. Um, I think the habit that's most important is breaking for lunch because I think a lot of times I'm running all the time, and because it's such a blurred amount of time, I'm breaking for lunch, which I almost always get to have with my family, which is very nice. But taking time to sort of separate out some pieces that are just not going to be overrun, I think is really valuable.
That makes a lot of sense. And what's your favorite thing about the Massachusetts robotics cluster? Obviously, there's a lot of mobile robot companies in our neighborhood, and there's a lot of talent in the area. But what's your favorite thing?
I love the environment. We've started so many interesting companies here, and I think what I'm excited about is I feel very lucky. We were a successful robotic startup clearly, and I see there hasn't been enough of them in the past. I think it's because technology is growing, and I think we're building the teams, we're building the people, we're building technologies, and I'm really excited to see more and more success come out of this area. It's an amazing team. The people are very supportive. People like working together, and I just want to see more and more companies succeed in this space. I think it's just a matter
No,
of
I
time.
think that's a great point in that there's, as far as I can understand, there's a lot of room for all the companies that are here and more in the market.
Oh, absolutely. There's in robotics is such a wide space, and it's just barely touched some of the fields. It's touched very few fields so far, and there's so much opportunity. And as our processing power and sensing gets better and cheaper, it just opens up a wider amount of opportunity.
Awesome. Hey, Chris, thanks so much, and best wishes to you, your family, and hope everything continues to go well at Six River Systems.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Gene. You guys be careful yourselves.
Before we get into our next conversation, make sure to check out the complete RBR 50 Innovation Award list at roboticsbusinessreview.com. Up next is my conversation with Gautam Narang. He's the co-founder and CEO of another RBR 50 company called Gatik. Gatik is solving middle mile logistics using level 4 autonomous vehicles. Gautam and I talk about how Gatik landed a partnership with Walmart while it was still in stealth mode, Gatik's hybrid approach to level 4 autonomy, restricting its vehicles to the rightmost lane, and much more. We also discussed the changing investment landscape around autonomous vehicles and why level 5 autonomy, if it can ever be solved, is at least 10 to 15 years away, according to Gautam. So here's my conversation with Gautam Narang. Enjoy.
So this was, me and my co-founders, Arjun and Apeksha. All three of us, we have been in the autonomy space for many years. So we started with working on mobile robots and then eventually autonomous vehicles. So this was back in 2016, late 2016 and early 2017, when we started, thinking about autonomous vehicles for the logistics space. So what we saw was, in the autonomous delivery landscape on one end, uh, at that time we had self-driving trucks. So these are 18-wheeler semis. The technology on these trucks, as you know, is better suited for highway driving. So that was one end of the spectrum. Then on the other end of the spectrum, inside the cities, at that time we had these smaller delivery robots making deliveries to the customers' doorsteps. So these were, sidewalk delivery robots or even neuro-sized vehicles. And then the challenge with these robots were typically payload, operating distance, and speed. So all of this was very restricted, and there was a huge gap in the market, which is the middle mile. There still is, and we saw this gap. Talk to a lot of companies in the space, logistics companies, 3PLs, distributors, retailers, and realized that this is a huge opportunity. So the middle mile segment is largely underserved, and it's very expensive for these companies. So we at Gatik decided to address it. And then, the whole philosophy of why we wanted to do B2B, all of that was driven by one, on the technology side, doing fixed, repeatable routes was straightforward, was more near term. The technology needed to solve this problem. We didn't have to. This was basically a constraint way of approaching autonomy. So that was one, and the second part was there was just a big need of this solution. There still is of need for this solution in the market. So that's why we decided to address the middle mile.
Now, one of the partnerships that Gatik has been public about is their partnership with Walmart. I would be very public about that partnership too if you guys come out of stealth mode in, what was it, 2019, and we're announcing that partnership. So congrats on that. But I'm curious, what can you share about how that partnership came to be?
We announced the partnership, I believe, in June last year, and before that, Gatik, we have kept a very low profile. We were in stealth before that, working on the technology, understanding more about the market, making sure, when we deploy, when we are ready to work with the customer, we are at a point where we feel comfortable and confident about our stack. So that's basically how we came about. Like, okay, now is the time, or early last year was the time. Okay, we're ready to work with customers, and with Walmart, it was a natural fit. So, specifically what we are doing for them is handling their hub and spoke network. So, a typical use case that would entail in that segment is moving goods from a micro distribution center. This is their dark store, and then moving those goods. These are online grocery orders to multiple retail stores, and that is happening using our vehicles. And then I think the Walmart partnership, came about. So we got introduced to the folks at Walmart through one of our investors. They were, looking for a solution like this. Interestingly, all the customers, they view their supply chain in three segments. So one is the long haul trucking space, then the middle mile, and then the last mile. So when we approached Walmart, and credit to Walmart, they knew what they were looking for, and when we shared our solution, it was an instant fit. So we felt this is something that was needed, and by Walmart, and we could grow with the organization, and that's what's happening now. So last year we announced that we started with Ford Transit Connects. We announced that platform last year, and this year, I think a couple of weeks back, we announced an industry first, our autonomous box truck platforms that we're using with Walmart and other customers as well. So Walmart is just one of the partnerships that we have announced publicly. As of today, Gatik is working with multiple retailers across North America.
One of the things I want to make sure that we touch upon is, the unique approach that Gatik is taking. It's developing level 4 autonomous vehicles, and I know you try to restrict them to the far right lane as much as possible. That doesn't mean from a technical standpoint you can't drive in the other lanes or take left-hand turns and all that kind of stuff. And I want to get to that in a minute. But for me, like, why are you addressing the middle mile challenge autonomously? Why did it have to be with autonomous vehicles? I mean, couldn't you do something similar, get it off the ground quicker and scale it quicker with manned vehicles? Or is there a problem with finding folks who are interested in doing that?
And that's a great question, and I think all of this is happening because of what's happening in the supply chain, in the logistics industry. So as you know, as we all know, e-commerce is growing like crazy, and all of this is being driven by end consumer demand. So as an end consumer, we want our orders or our deliveries now and at the cheapest possible price. So specifically in the retail space, the old architecture of supply chain was you had this giant distribution center that was far away from the populated areas, and these DCs were used to make deliveries to the stores that were close to the customer, And the frequency of these deliveries were once every 1 to 7 days. So that's how frequent these deliveries were, which is not fast enough. So if you're trying to make these deliveries faster, so I'm specifically talking about online groceries now. So retailers are promising 1 hour delivery, 2 hour delivery. To make that possible, to enable that, you have to get close to the customer. So once you get close to the customers, the size of your warehouses, it shrinks. So there's a trend happening in the retail space. This is called micro distribution center or micro fulfillment centers. So the idea is, let's shrink the size of our warehouses. Let's get close to the customer, and serve the stores in a hub and spoke capacity. And so when you shift from a single node architecture to this hub and spoke architecture, there is an explosion in number of routes, number of drivers needed, and number of vehicles needed. And that's where we come in. So at Gatik, this is the very shift that we are enabling for our retail partners. So, and why we are addressing this, simply put, there aren't enough drivers. And obviously, if you try to increase the wages, it adds to the operating cost. So, uh, basically, aren't enough drivers to handle these additional routes. And then the idea is, with autonomous vehicles operating them on fixed predefined routes, this problem can be solved. And from a technology standpoint, it also makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned, yes, we do introduce a lot of constraints in our technology stack. So at Gatik, we believe that we are not really solving the autonomy problem. So we are not going after generic level 4. Rather, we are solving the middle mile problem. So whatever constraints that we can introduce in our tech stack to solve the middle mile problem, we are doing that. And restricting the vehicle to the rightmost lane is one of the constraints.
I know you also take fixed, repeatable routes, right? Again, and this is I don't know if famous is the right word, but when you and I talked before, you mentioned the UPS model. Their trucks try to take only right-hand turns, I believe. Were you aware of that? Did you kind of, did Gatik implement that because of what they're doing, or is it something that you kind of just stumbled into?
Well, we stumbled into it.
That's a bad word.
Because
I hate that word. I shouldn't use it. I think I actually used that on the last podcast. That you engineered your way into this approach.
Yeah. Basically, the idea is, whatever FedEx or UPS was doing or are doing, wouldn't necessarily make sense for us. But interestingly, we approached this from a tech angle first, and then realized, okay, all the legacy players, they're already doing it. FedEx and UPS truck, their reasons for doing this is different. They're trying to save time and fuel, not waiting at the traffic lights. But for us, it was, it made sense, and it was safer and easier for the technology. So when I talk about constraints, our philosophy is, okay, in whatever will make the system more safe, and whatever will help us get to commercialization and scalability faster, we'll do that. And just taking right turns is one of the ways. So in this particular case, when I say that, okay, we are just taking right turns, or I should say mostly right turns, what that means is, in the US, you can connect most of the addresses by taking mostly right turns. As you pointed out, that does not mean that our system cannot handle left turns or unprotected left turns. The whole idea is, whatever you are doing, whatever your ODD is, whatever your features or capabilities of your system are, you have to do that day in and day out. It's not about one-off demos. It's not about doing it sometimes. You have to do it every time, all the time. And we realized by taking just right turns or mostly right turns, we could ensure that level of safety. So, and what it means is, from a technology standpoint, we don't have to worry about changing lanes. We don't really have to solve for unprotected left turns. So, as you might know, the whole industry is struggling with really solving for unprotected left turns all the time at scale. So, at Gatik, we don't really have to wait to solve that problem. We have a clear path to commercialization, and this is what we are doing today.
I look at some of the, maybe more mainstream or more, the Waymos and the Cruises of the world. These companies have raised, Waymo just recently has raised billions of dollars. Cruise has raised billions of dollars. What are just your thoughts on, maybe you don't have to speak specifically about any of those companies in general, but just your thoughts on these companies that are trying to solve level 5 at scale for whether it's ride sharing or robo taxis, whatever you want to call it. from talking to you a couple of times, I just kind of get the feeling that you don't see that coming anytime soon. Is that fair to say?
Waymo and or other companies that are going after the robotaxi application, they are targeting level 4 at least initially. So through level 4, in my opinion, is at least 4 to 6 years out. So this is at scale, commercialized, deployed in a large area. Level 5, being very optimistic and assuming we can solve the problem, is at least 10, 15 years out. So level 5 is the gold standard, I think, in my opinion. It's a while. It's going to be a while before we see vehicles driving everywhere without a safety driver on board. So it's there's going to be a while. So at Gatik, we are targeting constraint level 4. So instead of going after a geofenced area, instead of trying to solve for general autonomy, we solve autonomy over fixed repeatable routes. And the way we do it is, we operate these vehicles back and forth on these routes. By doing so, we over optimize our technology, overfit our machine learning models to perfect driving on these routes. So you're right that, if you're trying to compete with the big players, well resourced companies, you have to be smart. The way we are being smart is, picking up an ODD where uh, let's say in this case, the data requirements are very different. So when I say overfitting, or when I say we have to, our ODD is very constrained. It's very manageable, and it's possible with the kind of resources that a startup like ours have. So that's one part. But I think the another big part is, we are actually revenue generating today. We are making money. That is, all the deployments are revenue generating. So interestingly, at a vehicle level, we are not losing money. So that part of
That's a good thing.
it is, and it helps. So I would
Yeah.
say very few companies are in our space. They are really thinking about whether they have a real business model that would be revenue generating in the now or in the future. So everyone's understanding, or that was the understanding for the last few years, was, oh, let's solve this technical problem, and automatically there will be business cases that will emerge, or we will be able to sell this. But now I think we are at a point where the industry is realizing, yes, that okay, uh, technical challenge is one thing, but you really have to solve the business side of things as well. The way we are looking at this at Gatik is, matching what's possible from a technology standpoint to what's needed in the market, what's the pain point for our customers, and then solving that. And that's why, just to say it and emphasize on this, is, we are really solving the middle mile problem, not the autonomy problem. So it's problem first approach. So it's not like, we build a technology and trying to fit the technology into a use case. That's not what's happening at Gatik. We really started with the problem first. From day one, we were focusing on B2B short haul. Uh, Today as well, that's the focus, and it's an exciting space to be in. So I think you'll notice moving forward, and it's happening already. Many companies are taking notice that autonomous deliveries is going to be uh, the first commercial application of autonomy, and now companies are comfortable saying it out loud.
I wonder if this is a sort of a trend that maybe is happening in the AV space, right? So just off the top of my head, some other companies, and to be honest, I don't even know if they're generating revenue. One of them that comes to mind is Optimus Ride. They're a Boston-based company. They partner with several gated communities where they're just operating within that gated community, taking passengers from one place to the next. They recently announced that they're making food deliveries, I think in Washington, D.C. area. Maybe May Mobility is generating some revenue. Is it Aurora was operating in a retirement community down in Florida? But are you seeing other companies, other AV companies sort of adopting that mindset from the get-go? Is the true full autonomy piece is too far out. So if we want to eventually get there, let's in the meantime figure out a way to make some money.
Well, yes, that's kind of happening, but I would say, majority of the companies that, let's say, were focusing on robotaxi application or passenger transportation application, um, if recently they have announced plans to do deliveries, I would say they're still dabbling into the autonomous delivery space. It's deeper than many companies realize. It's not as simple as, okay, now I'll start doing deliveries to the end consumer. There is a lot a lot goes on the customer side as well. So the fact that we started working with customers early last year, that has shaped our offering, that has shaped our solutions from day one. So it's and there is a need of being focused in our space. Companies have overpromised or promised a lot of things for the last few years. Now things are changing. So obviously there's a consolidation happening. Companies um, are being more realistic about the timelines, about the challenges of autonomy. So if a company tries to say, okay, they're doing robotaxi, then they're doing deliveries as well. uh, it's a tricky thing to do. So trying to do everything, and this has been the problem in our space. Back in 2016, 2017, companies were over promising. They were like trying to do everything at once, trying to build multiple businesses at once. I think that is something that that did not serve us well. So basically, when you're talking about autonomous deliveries, we will see that more companies will dabble into this space, will look at this space. But yeah, I think it's deeper than that. So our customers, or majority of the customers, frankly, they don't really care about autonomy. All they care about is it bringing more efficiency to their supply chain? Does the price point make sense? What all value adds are we providing to the customer? So I think very few companies would take the time, or are taking the time, to really understand the market.
It's a great point, and it's a great lesson that we try to write about a lot from take autonomous vehicles out of the scenario. Just other types of robots and robotics companies is, some folks just over engineer, right? Or they try to solve a problem that technically isn't possible at this moment. Whereas there's some other companies that take a much simpler approach, and they ensure they have the, sort of the vertical knowledge of that industry, and they just design a solution to solve, a customer's pain point, right? And that seems to work out better. So, kudos to Gatik for kind of seeing that from the start. I want to ask you this. I know you're in the middle of, I assume, raising a funding round. Coming back to these companies that have already raised billions of dollars, this is such a long-term play for these investors that have sort of jumped in head first, whether it's for Waymo or Cruise or some other companies that are escaping my mind right now. But just what's the play there for those investors? I mean, it's such a long-term play, and it might never happen. What is sort of the thinking for them?
I think obviously can't say for the investors, but what we are seeing is traditional value-based investors, or institutional investors. They frankly have placed their bets, and they are in it for the long run, as you said, and now they're waiting. And obviously, the AV space recently have gone through a negative hype cycle. So as there are reports, okay, companies are struggling to raise money. Frankly, that's not the case at Gatik. We have a good war chest going into the COVID situation. So our plans are a bit different. So we are planning to accelerate our deployments, accelerate our expansion of our operations. But coming back to from the investment side, I think more and more startups are looking at the corporate side. So corporate investments are the trend, and not just the trend, but I think that helps the startups as well. I think it helps the corporates as well. So I think startups need to be creative about, okay, where they raise money from, but there's definitely the landscape is different from what it was back in 2016 and 17. So obviously the investors are very careful now. Only sophisticated investors, who understand the space, who understand autonomy, I think they will be the ones who will be benefited.
I have to ask you this question. I know you probably can't answer it, but when it comes to Gatik's revenue, where is Gatik at the moment? How many sort of paid contracts do you guys have? I mean, I know there's Walmart, and I know you work with multiple Fortune 500 companies across North America, but what more can you tell us about where you are right now in terms of generating revenue?
Well, not a lot right now. We do have plans to announce a few more partnerships this year. But what I can share is, significant revenue, obviously, and all the deployments from day one have been paid deployments. So we don't do a short pilot or just a pilot for the sake of doing a pilot. We don't do that. Obviously, we take our time working with the customers to understand, okay, where does our solution make sense in their supply chain. So from day one, we can basically charge a customer. So that's one. And uh, I think on the revenue side, we do have plans to deploy more vehicles that will help us more on the revenue side. So I think it's still vague. But we do have plans to share more on that front in the coming months.
I read just yesterday you got stuff going on in Arkansas. You're expanding to Michigan. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
You received a grant to what can you tell us about what you're going to do in Michigan?
Well, yes. So we are working with one of the largest regional retailer in Michigan, and this grant was from Planet M. So Gatik will be expanding to Michigan soon, and this is basically in partnership with the local retailer. So yeah. I think there, as I said again, it's not going to be a short-term pilot, or it's basically the kind of contracts that we signed, partnerships on the customer front. All of those are long-term partnerships.
And then how about your home state, California? In December, I think it was December 2019, they approved the use of light-duty autonomous vehicles to be tested in the state of California, which
That's right. Yeah.
I think that falls for you, the light-duty box trucks you just introduced. What are the plans for the state of California?
Well, we have been testing in California since March or April 2018. So that's when we got the California AV testing permit, and then you're right. Last December is when they approved commercial light duty vehicles, and our box trucks, they fall within the weight limitations specified. So, and then yeah, I think now we are starting to test our autonomous box trucks in California as well. So very soon, we'll see our vehicles being tested on public roads in California as well.
Can you just describe the sensor stack in Gatik's vehicles?
Sure. Yeah. So we use the full suite. So we use multiple lidars, radars, cameras for 360 coverage all around the vehicle. So specifically, we have 6 lidars. So we use one 128 channel lidar, and then five 16 channel lidars for basically a 360 blanket all around the vehicle, covering all the blind spots. Then we have 6 radars on the vehicle today. So the front center and the rear center are long range radars. Then we have 4 more at each corner. These are medium range radars. And then we have 12 to 14 cameras on the vehicle. So our philosophy is let's use the full suite. So our margins, our business, our use case enables us to basically have these redundant sensor modalities. We are not trying to cut corners on the sensor side. We there will be optimization, but as of today as well, we can use the full suite and still make the economics work. So that's why the decision to include lidars in our in a sensor suite as well.
Is Gatik a family affair? Is Arjun, is that your brother, or are you related, or
He is. Yes, it's a yeah, that's true actually. So Arjun is the CTO. He's my older brother. Me and Arjun, we have worked on projects together and started companies throughout our careers, frankly. So it's helpful that he's in the same industry, same field. He also spent time at Carnegie Mellon working on autonomous vehicles. I I was also a researcher at CMU first, and then went back as a graduate student, studied robotics there. But yeah, Arjun and I have been doing this for many years. All of this started back home in India. It's been more than 12 years now. So this was around 2007, 8, where we started working on advanced robotics projects in India. So initially, we started our career as researchers working on bipedal robots, humanoid robots, then made the transition to mobile robots, then eventually self-driving cars. But yeah, Arjun is handling all the technology developments. He's the CTO, and it's interesting and fun to be to be working with your older brother.
Yeah, I have an older brother myself, so I understand the brotherly love, but there's also sometimes the brothers fight a little bit. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you work out these just internal debates if those arise?
Well, yeah, his expertise and his and our expertise, it's very complementary, and our personality styles are very different as well, and that helps. So basically, he's the kind of person who is like very detail oriented, pays attention to details. Would be He's basically a perfectionist, and my style is let's move fast, let's hack things, and yeah. So I'm the hacker on the team, and then. Yeah. Then our second co-founder, Apeksha, she is basically, yeah, she's the chief engineer. We have all three of us. We have worked together at a previous company. We were doing autonomous outdoor security robots. Um, so yeah, so all three of us, it helps that this is our second company together, and the previous one as well was kind of a distributed team. So with Gatik, we have offices in Palo Alto. We have a second engineering office in Toronto, Canada as well. So let's say if I'm traveling to Canada, I know that Arjun and Apeksha, things are well on the US side of things.
Now she's in charge of machine learning, right? Just explain, the audiences will be interested in, how's Gatik taking advantage of machine learning?
She is, yes. So, between the three of us, so amongst the three of us, Arjun and I, we come from conventional robotics background. Then Apeksha is the machine learning, deep learning expert. So, when I say we are doing overfitting of models, that is route specific. So that's where the learning part comes in. So our driving policy module is hybrid. So it's learning first, but it's not end to end. We actually break down the decision making part into smaller submodules, and these submodules are the ones that we overfit for a particular route. And the output from these black boxes, we then cross check or validate by rules or conventional robotics techniques. So the stack is very much the hybrid between learning and classical robotics technique, and the fact that the three of us, there is experts on either side. And we have had interesting conversations on, let's say, if you're trying to find a solution to a problem, we can look at that in more than one ways.
How did Gatik conduct testing before there were any paying customers? What were you guys doing?
Well, we have three steps for our deployments or for our testing. So obviously, we rely heavily on simulation. So any new routes, any new geographical area, we do that in simulation first. That's the first step. Then the second step is structured testing. So this is a closed course or a private parking lot where we test our vehicles. And then third step is actually testing on public roads. So before we had paying customers, we started testing in California. That's when we got the AV permit. But as you can imagine, even before that, we could uh, test our stack in shadow driving mode. We could test it in simulation. So basically, you can get to a really good level of performance in simulation, and then public road testing started in early 2018.
What are some of the bigger challenges for Gatik? I mean, whether it's a technical challenge, whether it's a business challenge,
Yeah.
what are some of the bigger challenges that Gatik is facing right now?
Well, the current challenge is, there is, thanks to COVID, there is a huge demand from the customer side. So, what we're trying to do is accelerating our deployment timelines. So, some of the customers that we are working with, they have requested us to add more vehicles into existing operations. So, that's what we're trying to do. So, moving up our deployment times. At the same time, onboarding new customers and making sure our supply chain is there to be able to do that fast enough. So I think that's the biggest challenge that the company is facing. So it's a good problem to have, but still, I think the team is having fun. The last few weeks and months, they have been crazy busy for Gatik. So uh, that's basically what we're seeing on the business side. On the technology front, the team is heads down on an upcoming milestone. So basically, without going into the details, you know, we are making some great progress on the technology front. and have plans to make good announcements in the future. So, yeah, on the technology side, basically getting more experience, more data, adding more deployment sites. As a result, making our stack more robust. So that's basically what we are focusing on.
Gautam Narang, CEO, co-founder of Gatik. Thank you so much for joining us on the Robot Report podcast. Best of luck moving forward, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, Steve.
That's going to do it for episode 4 of the Robot Report podcast. Thank you to Six River Systems founder Chris Cacioppo and Gatik co-founder and CEO Gautam Narang for joining the program. Gino, what do we got coming up next week?
Well, next week, we'll recap some of the biggest stories from the first half of the year so far. We'll talk about space robotics with Motive, and we'll debut a new podcast segment called Startup of the Week.
So make sure you catch our next episode next Wednesday. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Please smash that subscribe button and give us a rating. And to stay updated on all the latest robotics industry news, follow our network of robotics sites, the Robot Report, Robotics Business Review, and Collaborative Robotics Trends. For Eugene Demetri, I'm Steve Crow. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday.